I will never forget the moment my grandfather stood at the head of that Thanksgiving table with a bruise the size of a fist blooming dark purple under his left eye, holding a black envelope in his weathered hands like a loaded gun. The crystal chandeliers above us seemed to dim as Edward Sterling, the man who had built $1 billion real estate empire from nothing, looked at each of us with eyes that held no warmth, only cold calculation and something far more terrifying: betrayal. My mother, Rachel, sat frozen in her chair, her champagne glass halfway to her lips, her perfectly applied makeup unable to hide the sudden pallor of her face. Next to her, my stepfather, Rick Thorne, the man I had grown to despise over the past 3 years, had that smug smile plastered across his face, the same smile he wore when he thought he had won. But this time, something was different. This time, my grandfather was not the broken old man they had reduced him to. This time, he was the predator and they were the prey. "Well, well," Rick drawled, leaning back in his chair with false confidence. "Rough night, old man. Maybe you finally learned who runs this family now." My mother actually laughed. The sound was brittle cruel. "Oh, Daddy, you really should be more careful. At your age, falls can be so dangerous." I felt my blood turn to ice. Fall. My hands clenched into fists under the table. I had heard them 3 nights ago, heard their whispered conspiracy, seen Rick sneak into grandfather's study. This was no fall. Before I could speak, my grandfather set down a thick stack of documents next to the black envelope documents with red court seals and the Sterling Enterprises logo embossed in gold. His voice when he spoke was not the tired rasp of an old man, but the commanding boom that had once made corporate executives tremble. "The price of betrayal is not just a bruise," he said, his gaze moving from Rick to Rachel with surgical precision. "This is your Thanksgiving gift." If you are enjoying this story of justice and revenge, please hit that like button, subscribe to hear more stories like this, and drop a comment below telling me what you would do in this situation. Your support means everything, but I am getting ahead of myself. To understand how we arrived at this moment, how the warmest family holiday became a battlefield, I need to take you back. Back to when I still believed my mother loved her father more than she loved money. Back to when I was naive enough to think that family meant something sacred, something that could not be bought or sold or destroyed by greed. 3 months before that fateful Thanksgiving, I had returned to the Sterling mansion after finishing my MBA at Stanford. I was 26 years old, eager to join the family business to learn from the grandfather who had always been my hero. Edward Sterling was not just wealthy, he was legendary. A self-made man who had started with a single apartment building in Brooklyn and turned it into Sterling Enterprises, one of the largest real estate portfolios on the East Coast. Hotels, office buildings, residential towers. The Sterling name was everywhere, a symbol of quality and integrity. What I did not know was that during my 2 years away, everything had changed. My mother Rachel had always been distant cold even, but I attributed it to her own difficult childhood, losing my grandmother when she was young, being raised by nannies while grandfather built his empire. When she married Rick Thorne 5 years ago, a year after my father died in a car accident, I tried to be happy for her. Rick was charming at first, attentive, seemingly devoted. He worked in finance, he said investment management. He wore expensive suits and knew all the right things to say. But charm, I would learn, is just another word for deception. The first dinner back at the mansion should have been a celebration. Instead, it was a masterclass in discomfort. We sat in the formal dining room, the one with the hand-painted murals, and the table that could seat 20, just the 4 of us scattered at one end like strangers. "Sophia, darling," my mother said, her voice saccharine sweet. "You look so thin. Stanford must have been exhausting." "I am fine, Mom. Actually, I am excited to start working with grandfather. I have so many ideas for expanding the portfolio into sustainable development." Rick snorted into his wine glass. "Sustainable development. That is cute. Let the adults handle business, sweetheart." I felt my face flush. "I have a degree in business administration with a focus on real estate development. I think I am qualified to contribute." "Rick," my grandfather said quietly, but there was steel in his voice. "Sophia graduated top of her class. Her ideas are welcome at Sterling Enterprises." The look that passed between Rick and my mother in that moment should have been my first real warning. It was not love or concern. It was calculation. It was conspiracy. Of course, Dad, Rachel said smoothly. We are all just one big happy family, right? All working together. But we were not working together. Over the next 2 months, I began to see the cracks, the signs I had been too blind or too hopeful to notice before. Rick was at the Sterling Enterprises office almost daily now, not as an employee, but as my mother's companion, sitting in on meetings he had no business attending, offering opinions on deals he knew nothing about. And my mother, who had never shown interest in the business before, suddenly wanted to be involved in every decision. My grandfather grew quieter, more withdrawn. I would find him in his study late at night, surrounded by paperwork, his face lined with worry. When I asked if everything was okay, he would smile that sad smile and pat my hand. Just old man problems, my dear. Nothing for you to worry about. But I did worry, especially when I started noticing discrepancies in the company accounts transfers that did not make sense. Contracts signed by my mother that diverted funds to shell companies I had never heard of. When I brought these concerns to my grandfather, he looked at me with such profound sadness that I almost wished I had not asked. I know, he said simply. I have known for a while now. Then why do you not do something? Why do you not stop them? He was silent for a long moment, staring at the portrait of my grandmother that hung above his desk. Because she is my daughter, Sophia. Because I kept hoping she would remember who she is, who she was raised to be. Because love makes us foolish. That conversation haunted me for weeks. How much should we forgive in the name of family? Where is the line between love and enabling destruction? I got my answer 3 days before Thanksgiving. I could not sleep that night. The mansion was quiet, the kind of heavy silence that feels like it is holding its breath. I had gone downstairs to the kitchen for water when I heard voices coming from the direction of my grandfather's study. Low, urgent voices. I moved closer, my bare feet silent on the marble floors. The old bastard is changing his will. That was Rick, his voice tight with anger. I saw the call log. 3 calls to Smith, his lawyer, just this week. Are you sure? My mother's voice, sharp with panic. After everything we have done, everything we have sacrificed. I pressed myself against the wall, my heart pounding so hard I was afraid they would hear it. We have to act fast, Rick continued, before he can finalize anything. I need you to keep him distracted while I search his study. There has to be a draft copy somewhere. And if we find it, then we convince him to reconsider, however we have to. The menace in those last words made my skin crawl. I waited until I heard them move away, then slipped back upstairs, my mind racing. I had to warn my grandfather, but when I reached his bedroom door, I hesitated. What proof did I have? Overheard whispers, suspicions. He already looked so tired, so worn down. Could I add this burden to his shoulders? I decided to wait to gather evidence first. It was a decision I would regret for the rest of my life. The next morning, I woke early and positioned myself where I could watch the hallway leading to grandfather's study. Sure enough, around 2 in the morning, I saw Rick's shadow moving down the corridor. He looked around carefully before slipping inside the study. I crept closer, staying in the darkness, and watched through the crack in the door as he rifled through my grandfather's desk, checking drawers, scanning papers under the light of his phone. He did not find what he was looking for. I could tell by the frustrated way he slammed the last drawer shut. But the violation, the sheer audacity of it, made me want to scream. This man, this interloper who had married his way into our family, was treating my grandfather's private space like it was his to ransack. The next day, my grandfather appeared at breakfast with that same distant expression, but his eyes, when they met mine, held a glimmer of something I had not seen before: determination. He looked at Rick, who was buttering his toast with studied casualness, and said, "Greed always comes with a price." Rick's hand stilled for just a moment before he continued spreading butter. "I am sorry, sir, I do not follow." "Oh, I think you follow perfectly well." My grandfather took a sip of his coffee. "I think you follow better than anyone at this table." The tension was suffocating. My mother jumped in, her voice too bright. "Dad, what are you talking about? Rick is family now. We are all on the same team." "Are we?" My grandfather set down his cup with deliberate care. "That is good to know, Rachel. That is very good to know." He left the table without finishing his breakfast, and I followed him. We stood in his study, the morning light streaming through the tall windows, and he turned to me with an expression I had never seen before. "Sophia, I need to tell you something. But first I need to know, do you trust me completely?" "Of course, grandfather, always." He nodded slowly, then walked to his bookshelf and pulled out a leather-bound volume. Behind it was a small safe. He entered the combination and withdrew several items: a USB drive, a thick file of documents, and a black envelope. "What I am about to tell you will hurt, but you need to know. You need to be prepared for what is coming." Over the next hour, he laid it all out. The theft, the manipulation, the shell companies. Rick had not just married my mother, he had targeted her, seen her as his entry point into the sterling fortune. Together, they had been systematically bleeding the company, siphoning funds, setting up a network of fraud that would have destroyed everything my grandfather had built. But Edward Sterling had not become a billionaire by being naive. He had suspected something was wrong months ago and had hired private investigators. He had documentation of everything. Wire transfers, recorded phone calls, even video evidence of Rick forging my grandfather's signature on documents. "Why have you not gone to the police?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Because she is my daughter," he said again, and this time I heard the crack in his voice, the grief of a father betrayed by his own child. I wanted to give her a chance to stop, to come back from this, but I see now that she has made her choice. "So what are you going to do?" He looked at me with those sharp, calculating eyes, and I saw the businessman, the strategist who had conquered New York real estate. "I am going to take back what is mine, and I am going to make sure that when I am gone, my legacy goes to someone who deserves it, someone with integrity." "Who?" "You, Sophia. All of it. Every building, every property, every share of Sterling Enterprises. I am changing my will, and you will be my sole heir." I felt the weight of that pronouncement like a physical thing pressing down on my shoulders. "Grandfather, I do not know if I am ready for this." "You are more ready than you know, and you will not be alone. I am putting protections in place. Michael, my former head of security, will be your right hand. I trust him with my life, and I trust him with yours." "What about Mom? What about Rick?" His face hardened. "They will get exactly what they have earned. Nothing." That conversation took place on Tuesday. By Wednesday afternoon, everything had escalated. I was in the library trying to study some company reports, but mostly just staring at the same page over and over when I heard the commotion. Shouting, something crashing. I ran toward the sound, my heart in my throat. The scene in my grandfather's bedroom was something out of a nightmare. Rick had my grandfather pinned against the wall, one meaty hand fisted in the collar of his shirt. My mother stood nearby. Her arms crossed her face, a mask of cold indifference. "You think you can cut us out, old man," Rick was saying, his face red with rage. "After everything, after all the years Rachel has put up with your controlling bullshit." "Let him go," I screamed, but Rick did not even look at me. My grandfather, despite being 78 years old and half Rick's size, maintained his dignity. "You will regret this." "The only thing I regret is not doing this sooner." Rick pulled back his fist and drove it into my grandfather's face. The sound of the impact made me sick. My grandfather crumpled blood, streaming from his nose, that terrible bruise already forming under his eye. "Stop!" I lunged forward, but my mother caught my arm. "Stay out of this, Sophia. This is between adults." "Adults? You are letting him beat up your father." Rachel looked at me with eyes I did not recognize, eyes that held no warmth, no love, nothing but cold calculation. "Your grandfather is being unreasonable. He just needs to understand reality. Sign the papers, Dad. Make Rachel the primary beneficiary and trustee of the estate. It is the sensible thing to do." My grandfather, blood dripping onto his shirt, looked up at his daughter with such profound betrayal that even Rick took a step back. "Never." Rick kicked him, actually kicked him while he was down. "We will see about that." I wanted to fight, wanted to do something, but I was terrified and paralyzed and utterly useless. When they finally left, I helped my grandfather to his feet. His lip was split, his eye swelling shut, but his grip on my arm was surprisingly strong. "Do not react," he whispered. "Do not show them what you saw. It is almost time." "Time for what?" "Thanksgiving," he said. "It will all happen on Thanksgiving." The next 2 days were torture. I played my role pretending I had not witnessed anything while my grandfather moved through the house like a ghost. But I noticed things now. I noticed Michael, the former head of security, showing up at odd hours. I noticed my grandfather spending hours on the phone with his lawyer. I noticed the way he watched Rick and Rachel not with fear, but with the patience of a hunter waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Thanksgiving Day arrived with all its grotesque irony. Family, gratitude, togetherness. The dining room had been set with our finest china, the table groaning under the weight of traditional dishes prepared by our chef. The house was filled with guests, business associates, and distant relatives who came every year drawn by the prestige of dining with Edward Sterling. But there would be no prestige tonight, only reckoning. I took my seat next to my grandfather, and he gave my hand a small squeeze. Under the table, I felt him pass me something. The USB drive. "When I give you the signal," he whispered so low only I could hear, "plug this into the television." My mother and Rick sat across from us playing their roles perfectly. Rick was charming, complimenting the food-making small talk with the guests. Rachel was the gracious hostess, smiling and laughing the devoted daughter. It made me want to vomit. Grandfather waited until everyone had been served, until the champagne had been poured and the first toasts made. Then he stood. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to the patriarch. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice carrying that familiar authority. "Thanksgiving is a time for family, for gratitude, for honesty." He paused, letting that last word hang in the air. "And tonight we are going to be very honest indeed." Rick shifted uncomfortably. Rachel's smile faltered. "Most of you know me as a businessman," my grandfather continued. "But tonight I stand before you as a father, as a man who has been betrayed by the people he trusted most." He reached into his jacket and withdrew the black envelope. "Sophia, would you mind helping me with the television?" My hands shook as I crossed to the massive flat screen mounted on the wall and inserted the USB drive. The lights dimmed automatically and the screen flickered to life. What appeared there made several guests gasp. It was security footage, crystal clear time, stamped 3 days earlier. The angle showed my grandfather's bedroom from above, capturing everything. Rick attacking grandfather. My mother standing by watching. The violence, the threats, the demands for him to sign over his assets. "What is this?" Rick's voice was strangled. "This is reality, Rick." My grandfather's voice was cold now, empty of all emotion. "This is what happens when you mistake patience for weakness." The video continued. Audio, now crystal clear recordings of their conversations about bleeding the company dry, about waiting for the old man to die so they could liquidate everything. My mother's voice talking about how much the properties would fetch once they were free to sell without grandfather's interference. Guests began standing, murmuring, moving toward the exits. No one wanted to be part of this family implosion. "This is fake," Rachel said, her voice shrill. "He is senile. He is making this up to turn everyone against us." Fake. My grandfather pulled out another document from the envelope. "Are these bank records fake? Are the wire transfers to shell companies in the Cayman Islands fake? Are the forged signatures fake?" He threw the papers on the table. "I have spent 6 months documenting everything. Every theft, every lie, every moment of your betrayal." Rick stood abruptly, his chair falling backward. "You cannot do this. We will fight you. We will tie you up in court for years." "You will do nothing." My grandfather's voice cracked like a whip. "Because I have already done what I needed to do. Yesterday, I filed the new will with my attorney. I also filed a complete dossier with the district attorney's office. Every crime you have committed is now part of an official investigation." The room seemed to tilt. My mother's face had gone from pale to completely white. "Everything I own, everything I have built goes to Sophia, the only person at this table who has shown integrity. The only person worthy of the Sterling name." "No," Rachel whispered. "You cannot. She is just a child." "I am 26 years old," I said, standing. My voice did not shake. I would not let it shake. "And I know more about integrity than you ever will." Rick pointed at me, his face twisted with rage. "You think you can handle this? You think you are ready to run an empire? You are nothing. You will fail, and when you do, we will be there to pick up the pieces." "She will not be alone," a deep voice said from the doorway. Michael stepped into the room, and with him were 2 other men I recognized as former Sterling security. "Mr. Sterling has asked me to ensure Miss Sophia's safety and to help her transition into her new role." My grandfather opened the black envelope fully now and pulled out the final document. His last will and testament officially notarized with copies filed in multiple locations. Rachel Sterling and Richard Thorne are hereby excluded from any inheritance or benefit from the Sterling estate. Furthermore, they are terminated immediately from any position or consultancy with Sterling Enterprises. They have 24 hours to remove themselves from this property. You bastard! Rick lunged across the table, but Michael and his team were faster. They intercepted him, holding him back as he struggled. Do not make this worse than it already is, Michael said calmly. You are facing criminal charges. If you assault Mr. Sterling again, I will personally ensure you never see daylight as a free man. My mother was crying now, ugly sobs that shook her whole body. She turned to me, reaching out. Sophia, please, tell him this is insane. Tell him families do not do this to each other. I looked at her, at this woman who had given birth to me but had long ago stopped being my mother, and felt nothing but sadness. You are right. Families do not do this to each other. But you stopped being family when you let him hurt grandfather, when you chose money over everything else. The guests had all fled by now. The feast sat untouched. It was just us, the wreckage of what had been the Sterling family, facing the consequences of greed and betrayal. Get out, my grandfather said quietly. Both of you, get out of my house. Rick and Rachel left that night screaming threats and promises of legal warfare. I watched them go from the window of my grandfather's study, where we stood, surrounded by decades of family photos that now felt like historical artifacts from some distant, happier time. Are you sure you want this? My grandfather asked me. This life, this responsibility, it is not going to be easy. They will fight. They will drag everything through the mud. I am sure, I said, and I meant it. Someone has to protect what you built. Someone has to prove that not everything is for sale. He put his arm around my shoulders, and we stood there in silence, watching the night swallow up the car, carrying my mother and Rick away from the Sterling mansion, perhaps forever. But that night was only the beginning. Rick and Rachel did exactly what they promised. Within a week, we were served with lawsuits. They claimed undue influence, that I had manipulated a vulnerable elderly man. They claimed my grandfather was suffering from dementia and was not competent to change his will. They hired attorneys who specialized in estate disputes and launched a media campaign designed to destroy both my grandfather's reputation and mine. Suddenly, tabloid newspapers were running stories about the Sterling family drama. Headlines screamed about the gold-digging granddaughter who had stolen a dying man's fortune. Photos of me were twisted to make me look cold, calculating. Anonymous sources, obviously Rick and Rachel, or people they had paid, gave interviews painting my grandfather as a senile tyrant and me as his puppet master. It was brutal, vicious, and exactly what my grandfather had predicted. They will try to break you, he told me one evening as we reviewed the latest batch of negative press. They will try to make you doubt yourself, to make you give up, but you cannot let them win. I will not, I promised, and I meant it. My grandfather had prepared for this. Over the next few weeks, I learned the full extent of his planning. Michael was not just a former employee. He had spent the past 6 months conducting a thorough investigation into Rick's background and activities. What he found was damning. Rick Thorne was not a legitimate investment manager. He had been fired from his previous firm for ethics violations. The company he claimed to run did not really exist. It was a front. Worse, Michael had discovered connections between Rick and several individuals involved in money laundering operations. Rick had not just been stealing from Sterling Enterprises. He had been using our company as part of a larger criminal enterprise. Then there was Jessica. I had not seen my adopted younger sister in almost 2 years. She had left for college in California and stayed there working in tech. But when I called her, explained what was happening, she did not hesitate. I am coming home, she said, and I am bringing my laptop. Jessica was a white hat hacker, someone who used her skills to expose security vulnerabilities and help companies protect themselves. She was brilliant, maybe the smartest person I knew. And when it came to digging up digital dirt, she was an artist. Within 3 days of arriving home, Jessica had accessed Rick's email accounts, his bank records, his entire digital life. What she found was a treasure trove of evidence. Emails discussing the theft from Sterling Enterprises, communications with known criminals, evidence of an affair Rick was having with a woman who worked at a title company, using her to help facilitate illegal property transfers. This guy is an idiot, Jessica said, showing me her findings. He did not even use encrypted email. It is like he wanted to get caught. We turned everything over to the district attorney's office. We also gave copies to our attorney, the legendary Jonathan Smith, who had served as the Sterling family lawyer for 30 years. Smith was meticulous, ruthless in his protection of his clients, and absolutely delighted by the ammunition we had given him. "This changes everything," he said, reviewing the documents. "Rick Thorne is going to prison, and Rachel, as his knowing accomplice, will be lucky if she avoids the same fate." The legal battle intensified. Rick and Rachel's attorney tried to suppress the evidence, claiming it was obtained illegally. Jessica had to testify about her methods prove that she had only accessed information that Rick had stored on servers without proper security. It was nerve-wracking, but she was unshakable on the stand, explaining in clear terms how Rick's own negligence and arrogance had made the information accessible. Meanwhile, the media narrative began to shift. Smith launched our own public relations offensive, releasing carefully curated information about Rick's criminal background, the documented abuse of my grandfather, the theft of millions from Sterling Enterprises. We gave an exclusive interview to a respected financial journalist who had covered my grandfather's career for decades. I sat in front of the cameras, my hands folded calmly in my lap, and told the truth. About witnessing the assault. About discovering the theft. About the choice my grandfather had to make between protecting his daughter and protecting his legacy. "My mother made her choices," I said. "And those choices have consequences. I love her. I will always love her. But I cannot and will not allow her to destroy everything my grandfather built. The Sterling name stands for integrity in this industry. That means something. That has to mean something." The interview went viral. Suddenly, public opinion shifted. People saw me not as a gold digger, but as a young woman trying to do the right thing in an impossible situation. They saw my grandfather not as a senile old man, but as someone who had been abused by the people he trusted most. The legal tide turned. The judge reviewing the will, reviewed all the evidence, including my grandfather's recent medical records showing he was completely competent, and dismissed Rachel and Rick's lawsuit with prejudice. But that was not all. The district attorney filed formal charges against Rick for assault, theft, fraud, and money laundering. Rachel was charged as an accomplice. I thought that would be the end of it. I should have known better. Rick had nothing left to lose now. His reputation was destroyed. He was facing serious prison time, and the fortune he had tried to steal was forever out of reach. Men like Rick do not go quietly into defeat. They lash out. They seek revenge. It was Michael who caught wind of the plan. One of his contacts in the security world heard rumors about a contract, a plan to kidnap me and use me as leverage to force my grandfather to drop the charges and sign over assets. Rick had apparently reached out to some very dangerous people, offering them a cut of the Sterling fortune if they could help him. "We need to set a trap," Michael said when he told me. "Let them come, but on our terms." My grandfather wanted to call the police immediately, but Michael convinced him that we needed evidence, needed to catch Rick in the act of attempting something that would put him away for decades. So we set the stage. We leaked information through channels we knew Rick was monitoring, suggesting that I would be alone at the mansion on a specific night while my grandfather was away at a business dinner. We cleared out most of the staff, making it look like the house was vulnerable. But in reality, Michael had brought in a team of 10 former military security personnel. The house was locked down tighter than a bank vault. They came at midnight, Rick and 3 other men, all armed. I was in the library pretending to read when I heard the first window break. My heart hammered in my chest, but I trusted Michael. I trusted the plan. Rick's voice echoed through the house. "Sophia, come out wherever you are. We just want to have a little chat." I stayed where I was, watching the doorway. Michael had given me a panic button, but I was not supposed to use it unless something went wrong. The security team would handle this. Rick and his men moved through the house searching. They were not subtle. Things crashed. Glass broke. I could hear Rick's frustration growing. Find her, she has to be here somewhere. When they finally reached the library, Rick's face was twisted with rage. He saw me sitting calmly in my grandfather's favorite chair, a book in my lap, and he laughed. It was a terrible sound. "There you are, princess. Did you really think you could hide from me after everything you have taken from me?" "I have not taken anything from you," I said, surprised by how steady my voice was. "You never had a right to any of it in the first place." "You self-righteous little bitch!" He started toward me, pulling a gun from his jacket. "You are going to call your grandfather right now. You are going to tell him to transfer everything into a trust controlled by me and Rachel, or I swear to God I will put a bullet in your head." "No," I said simply. His finger tightened on the trigger. For a moment, I thought Michael had miscalculated, thought this was how it all ended, shot in my grandfather's library by my mother's husband. Then the lights went out. Everything happened at once. I heard shouting, the sound of bodies hitting the floor. Rick screaming in pain and confusion. When the lights came back on 30 seconds later, Rick and his 3 associates were face down on the floor. Weapons confiscated, Michael's security team holding them at gunpoint. Rick looked up at me, blood streaming from his nose where someone had hit him, and the expression on his face was pure hatred. "This is not over. You will pay for this." "Actually, it is over." I stood, walked to the doorway where police officers were now streaming in. We had coordinated with law enforcement from the beginning. They had been waiting outside for my signal. "These officers are here to arrest you for attempted kidnapping, armed home invasion, and attempted murder. Add that to your existing charges. I suspect you will be spending the rest of your life in prison." Rick was screaming obscenities as they dragged him away, but I did not listen. I was watching the police car where my mother sat in the back seat, her head bowed. She had waited outside, had been part of this plan, and now she was going to pay the price alongside her husband. The trial was a media sensation. Rick was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 40 years in prison. Rachel, in a last attempt to save herself, testified against him, admitted her role in the theft and cover-up, and received a lighter sentence of 15 years. Both were ordered to pay restitution to Sterling Enterprises, though of course they had no money to pay. My grandfather lived long enough to see justice done. He passed away peacefully in his sleep 6 months after the trial concluded, leaving me not just his fortune, but his wisdom, his strength, and his unshakable belief that integrity matters more than anything else in this world. I am 30 years old now. Sterling Enterprises has doubled in value under my leadership. We have expanded into sustainable development, affordable housing initiatives, and community revitalization projects. We still make money, lots of it, but we also make a difference. Michael is my chief of security and a trusted advisor. Jessica runs our entire technology division. We have built something that goes beyond just accumulating wealth. We have built something that matters. I have not spoken to my mother since her sentencing. She writes to me sometimes from prison letters full of apologies and regrets. I read them, but I do not respond. Some betrayals cut too deep for simple forgiveness. Maybe one day I will be ready to face her again to try to understand how love became twisted into greed. But not today. My grandfather's portrait hangs in the lobby of Sterling Enterprises headquarters. Beneath it is a plaque with his favorite saying, the one he told me that night in his study. "Money does not destroy people, it reveals who they truly are." He was right. Money revealed my mother and Rick for the greedy, destructive people they became. But it also revealed what I was capable of. It showed me I had the strength to stand up for what was right, even when it meant standing against my own family. It taught me that sometimes the hardest decisions are the most necessary ones. I am the CEO of Sterling Enterprises now. I am the sole heir to a billion-dollar empire. But more than that, I am proof that you can survive betrayal, that you can build something meaningful from the ashes of family dysfunction, that integrity is not just a word, but a way of life. So I ask you, if you were in my position, if you discovered your family was stealing from you, abusing someone you loved, what would you choose? Would you have the courage to take a stand? Drop your answer in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, if you believe that sometimes justice means making impossible choices, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about the price of betrayal and the power of standing up for what is right. Your support keeps these stories coming. Thank you for listening.